had a virtual committee. So welcome to that. I hope that everything proceeds without any kind of further technical hitch. Perhaps we can start with apologies for absence. Do we have any, Alison, do we have any apologies for absence?
No, sorry, there's no apologies.
Okay, as far as I know, there aren't any.
Now in the meeting.
Right, we're trying to contact Angela, and Alistair is going to be slightly late. Okay, I've got to. Hello. I've got a preamble I have to read to you. If any member loses connection or has any technical issues during the meeting, support will be available from the ICT officer, that's Ian, on the phone number which has been emailed to you. Please can members ensure they've activated their cameras and muted their microphones. It's essential you use both during the meeting. You'll need to remember to unmute your microphone when you want to speak and turn it back on to mute thereafter. If a member wishes to ask a question or enter the discussion on an item, please activate the electronic hand, which is on your taskbar towards the bottom of your screen. Your requests are being monitored, and at the appropriate time, I'll invite you to speak. The electronic hand procedure also applies to declarations of interest, and I'll be asking for those in the next few minutes. In relation to declarations of interest, you need to ensure that if you have made a declaration which would normally require you to leave the chamber, such as a financial interest, you should turn your camera off and mute your microphone when you come to that item. You will still be able to hear the discussion, but not take part in any way. At the end of an item, you can turn your camera back on and return to the meeting as normal. If you've made a non-financial declaration or any other declaration where you would normally leave the chamber, then you can leave your camera on if you wish and either take part or not in line with the terms of the declaration. If a member wishes to raise a point of order, this should be done by unmuting the microphone to interrupt proceedings as to gain the attention of the chair as is normal. The message line can be activated by clicking once on chat, which you will see on the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. This will have the effect of displaying the chat line on the right-hand margin of your screen. Please note that the chat line should only be used to type in motions and amendments. Despite the name, and this is mainly for strategic committee and council meetings, this is not actually used as a chat, as this could be disruptive to the smooth running of the meeting. Finally, we need to adjourn. If we need to adjourn the meeting at any reason, you'll be required to disconnect from the meeting at that point of the adjournment. A time will be given for the meeting to recommence, and you will then just need to start the meeting, join the meeting again as normal. This will ensure that everyone is aware of the restart time. Sorry about all that, but this is something we're all getting used to. Thank you for that. Can I then move on to request any declarations of interest? Craig.
Yeah, thanks. It's just I've not met Mark Rogers, but I think it's important that I note a note of thanks to Mark and his team, because when this all kicked off, there were a business that actually deals with Christmas trees, and I had no idea that Christmas trees have to be pruned in a particular manner at a particular time. And if the operator had missed this time slot, which was during May, end of April to May, then the particular business could have lost up to £3 million worth of business, and there would have been about 15 to 18 forestry operatives that would have had to go elsewhere looking for work. And without that input from Highland Council officers, I would not have been able to work my way through DEFRA, Forestry Commission, to get letters of comfort that were needed for the accommodation officers, sorry, the accommodation places, and for the operatives as they moved from field or from area to area doing this work around Orness and on the Black Isle. So I think it's important that that is recognised. Thank you.
Okay, that was perhaps a mark of thanks rather than a declaration of interest, but thank you for that, Councillor Fraser. Mark Rogers, is your hand up?
No, it was just to thank Craig very much for those comments. I think we've all learned lots of new skills during COVID. PPE's been my key one that I knew nothing about before the start, and hope never to have to ever deal with again in the rest of my life. But no, I'm grateful we were able to assist. Thank you, Craig.
Okay, fine. Councillor McLean, Angela.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry for being late, Chair. I have a number, it's on item 3. I have a number of family members that either are teachers or work in catering or have some connection with schools. So it was just to highlight that. I don't know what Paul's going to say, but just in case, thank you. It's non-financial.
Non-financial. Thank you, Angela. Any other declarations of interest? I'm looking to see if there are any other hands. Margaret Patterson, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have some members of the family that are now working in education, so it's a non-financial interest. And as Councillor Craig Fraser did a thank you, could I do a very small thank you, because you know times have changed and we're no longer the Ross and Cromarty Area Committee. And, you know, very sadly, one of our excellent officers, Robbie Bain, has left us. And I just wanted to mention how fantastic an officer he was. And, you know, himself and our ward manager of Dingwall and Seaforth worked very much together. And if you phoned up, he would answer the phone. And if she was at a meeting, he would help out. And I think he was just such a gentleman. And I just would like to say that I'm very sad to see him leave, and he'll be a big miss to the council, and thank him for all his years that he gave to Highland Council, and wish him all the best in whatever career path he follows.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for that. Much appreciated, and I would endorse that 100%. Strangely enough, when I first met Robbie, he had a previous career in DFID, Department for International Development, and he had in fact dealt with a project proposal I'd put in about 15 years ago in the context of my work overseas. So that was a strange coincidence. It was nice to see him face to face. Yes, it's a shame he's left, and he did great service to the council. Thank you for that. I'm just going to skip to item 6, which is the minutes. Perhaps can I just ask for an endorsement of the minutes for the last meeting? Does anyone any problems with the minutes? Could I have a yes, Councillor Mackenzie? Graham, I can't hear you.
There we go. Page 6, last line, it says Mr. G. Mackenzie indicated that he wished his dissent to be recorded. That's not strictly accurate. All I asked for was that my abstention should be recorded.
Thank you, Graham. That'll be corrected. Any further comments? No. Could I have a proposer for the minutes? As amended, assuming they will be amended.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Seconder?
I'll second them.
Thank you, Angela. Proposed Jennifer, seconded by Angela. Thank you very much indeed. Okay,
Can
let's
I
move
ask
on.
a question? Sorry, I just
Yes.
wondered on page 5, the committee approved bullet point 2, where it talks about a future report will be provided to the council or to the area committee about the council garages in Ward 8 and 9. I wondered when that would likely be.
Well, I think we can turn to the man who should know all about that, Mark Rogers. Have you any update for us?
There's no timeline at the present time, unfortunately, since the last committee meeting. We've been off on other things, but I'm quite happy, Angela, to have a conversation with you separately about when you'd like to see that come forward and which particular things you'd like me to consider in the preparation of that report.
Thank you. Graham, is your hand still up, Graham, or is it? No, okay, fine. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, can I come in? Because I think we would all like to know what's happening about the garages. So if you don't mind, would you let us all know in our ward, Dingwall and Seaforth? Because I've been concerned about most of our garages, especially the ones that are not being used for a number of years. So I think we would all could do with an update on it, not just one member. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, you said that you're going to give us a report, and that's fine, as and when you're able to. I know you've got many other things to think about, but it would be appreciated. Thanks very much indeed. Yes. Okay, perhaps we could turn to education now. Paul, thank you very much for being with us. Paul Senior, the Executive Chief Officer Education, is going to give us a verbal update on the plans and preparations for schools reopening, paying, I think, particular attention to schools in this area. Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Thank you for the invitation to be here today to meet with this group. As a local government interim director or executive in recent years, I've had the good fortune to met with your equivalents in a number of local authorities. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today. As I say, the balance of challenge and support that this conversation can bring to help enrich and strengthen our plans and proposals going forwards. My update today follows the recent members briefing with a focus on the reopening of our schools and ELC settings in August. It also follows last week's Education Committee meeting, which colleagues were updated on progress with regards to the reopening of provision in August. I'd like to thank as a collective formally for the record, and I say the collective, the ecosystem as I call it, that contributes to the work of education. And that's obviously our colleagues in schools and settings at the coalface, but also our colleagues in facilities management, property, housing, catering, transport, IT, there's a whole range, and including our parents and carers as well. Many colleagues have gone on record about thanking our teaching staff in schools and settings, but also a number of colleagues have also recognised that it's not just about the folk at the coalface in schools and settings who are actually going the extra mile. There are a lot of folk contributing to the ecosystem to enable the reopening of schools and services from August. So recognising the support staff who are contributing, who throughout the summer will be working hard and going the extra miles to making this happen. So I'd like to go on record as thanking all of those staff, central services for the council, as well as colleagues in our schools and settings, and our parents and carers, who obviously in unprecedented times have had to step up and help bridge that gap. So as previously referenced in various committees, we were working towards a range of options, a range of scenarios with regards to enabling our schools and settings to be ready for August. The recent determination from the national government has set out the expectation that we work towards option A, as we call it, which is the reopening of schools and settings with no social distancing measures being deployed. This is our primary focus now, and this is the focus across all partner agencies and schools and settings, that we're intending or working towards reopening with no social distancing measures in place. Naturally, we will have to scenario base and consider potential fallback positions, such as B, which is obviously opening 100% with no social distancing, with 1 metre for the record. And also option C, which we've extended in terms of work going on in recent weeks, which is the 50% reopening with 2 metre social distancing being deployed. Now, naturally, those are important considerations. So our transport colleagues, our facilities colleagues, our catering colleagues in our schools and settings, is incumbent on them, naturally, to have evaluated and considered plans and models and risks around that as part of any scenario-based planning exercise. But primarily now, our main objective is about 100% reopening with no, as I say, social distancing measures in place. So since starting full-time with the local authority at the beginning of June, we've engaged in an intensive programme of consultation, engagement, co-production, planning, preparation, with colleagues in schools and settings and partner agencies and parents and carers. And a good example of this being my second week in role, when we set up a consultation event with the Highland Parent Council Partnership with SPOT. Over 180 folk in attendance in that meeting, so significant time investment and commitment. And in recent weeks, we've managed to develop frequently asked question documents for parents and carers, something similar for our staff in schools, something similar for our special schools, as we we recognise that the clientele, the cohort that work in special schools and have their needs met in special schools, it's a specialist area, therefore there's a need for a special lens on that. So there's been lots of activity ongoing to make sure that, in terms of planning and preparation, all stakeholders that are part of the ecosystem are contributing to the shaping and designing it. When I speak to my equivalents in other local authorities, not just in England, but in Scotland as well, there's talk of basically they've just had to get on with it, and co-production was a luxury and didn't maybe take place as best as it could have done. But I'm convinced our plans in terms of for a co-production lens will be able to stand up to scrutiny. And we've had endorsement where we've had HMIE contact us this morning, giving us feedback on our plans with regards to recognition that there's been a lot of activity undertaken. So that's a positive recognition. So you'll all have had sighting of, I'm sure, the web page with a focus on the schools reopening, which has been set up on the council's website in recent days, with lots of good information, advice and guidance and signposting, as well as the documents, some of which I've touched on earlier. So starting from a low base in terms of getting our information and comms out there, but many folk have played a role in contributing to that. So we'll keep adding to that over the coming weeks as we get more and more information, and as we get more and more information, in particular from colleagues at national government. Obviously, officers in recent weeks, with the support of our colleagues in schools and settings, have continuously adapted and adjusted their plans and processes in response to the latest announcement from the Deputy First Minister or from the First Minister, or what national determination and information, advice and guidance we've received. So everyone as part of the ecosystem has had to be flexible, innovative, creative. No blueprint for this, because we haven't been through this before. There was no master plan you take off the shelf and say, this is how you've done it before. I'm fortunate that I've worked in a number of other authorities, and as a member of the Association of Directors of Children's and Education Services in England and the National Government Advisor, I've had a lot of insight what works elsewhere, but no two authorities are the same, no two models are the same, and the challenges obviously differ. But there are some key ingredients with regards to what works, and I'm keen, and I recognise that a number of our colleagues in the Highland have taken that on. We do have a programme office, which I've mentioned at various meetings, which oversees the work of 11 subgroups, which covers transport, catering, facilities, as well as local areas, which again, a number of our colleagues in schools and settings and agencies and services have played a role. Mark Rogers' colleagues, for example, played an important role, working overtime at this moment in time to make sure that our settings are ready for August. Without Mark and his folk, with greatest respect, would be very, very vulnerable and compromised. Councillor Mackenzie plays a role as a board member in terms of my programme board for a focus on schools reopening. So many people have got roles to play, whether that be challenge, whether that be support, whether that be strategy, whether that be operations. But it's a significant investment across the local area in terms of time, energy, resource. Our plans are progressing. No one's saying we're perfect, but we've had external validation and feedback, which is welcoming. And I know our plans can stand up to scrutiny, which they have done with regards to HMIE, the feedback we've received, which we'll be able to share at the next education committee. So we'll be able to share that. So I suppose to conclude my verbal update, hopefully that gives you a feel for where we're at, some of the challenges ahead, and admission that we don't have all the answers, because we recognise that we're in an unprecedented world. We can learn from what's going on elsewhere. We can find our own Highland-specific solutions. But fundamentally, the design principle of consultation and co-production has stood us in good stead here, because the engagement has been fantastic. So, as I said, I've concluded my verbal update, so happy to take any questions through the chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Much appreciated. Are there any questions for Paul and indeed for Mark? Angela.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't expect to be first. Thank you, Mark. I think I've heard a similar presentation a couple of times now because I was at the Education Committee, and I just wondered, you talked about the 11 streams or the 11 subgroups, and this will be my third time asking, but if you could let me know which one of these 11 subgroups are dealing with young people in youth work and taking forward apprenticeships and looking at working with our third sector more closely. I'm not sure who is on the group and which group it is. And I think at the start, although you said Councillor Mackenzie Mackenzie, and I believe the Chair of Education, John Finlayson, are on dealing with scrutiny. I believe at the start there was a suggestion that a number of councillors with interest could take part in all of the groups. And I wondered how many councillors, apart from Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Finlayson, are taking part in the 11 subgroups. And if you could let me know which group's dealing with that, because as you know that I did say previously that we do have a new Highland Youth Work Strategy, which was co-produced with our young people and the third sector partners. And you do talk about co-production and conversations that are taking place. But in my view, unless you're sitting around the table, you're not part of that conversation. And if we're only talking to ourselves, then we won't come up with the answers, because many of the answers will be in our communities. And as we've all said over the last few months, that it's many of our community groups that have helped Highland Council get through the last few months, because they know, because they are based in the community, what many of our concerns are and where maybe some of the pinch points are. And as we move forward, getting our young people back to school, many of them are anxious, and there is a concern about mental health and anxiety. And some of these groups and our partners that are in the Highland Youth Network and High Life Highland and Eden Court, as I've mentioned before, and Face Ross, they are the very groups that will be able to help us, because I'm even reading Benny Higgins' a report that was launched last week. They talk about apprenticeships and the voluntary sector and working with vocational qualifications and not just academic qualifications. So I wondered where we are with that. Since I've got the floor, I wonder what's happening with St Clement's, and are we going to have 100% of young people back at school right away? I think that from previous conversations we've had with our head teachers at the ASGs, and we've got Dingwall and Fortress Academy, that they were looking at taking back S1, who were primary 7 from transition, take them first with the 5 and 6, S5 and 6. And is that the case? Will it be a staggered process back to school? So I'll stop there because I know there's other people wanting to speak, but I do go on, I know.
Thank you, Angela. Paul, would you like to address these issues, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor McLean. There's quite a bundle of questions there, which I'll endeavour to respond effectively as possible. With regards to youth work engagement, I think I've set out in a number of conversations, we do have the input of the third sector, our first sector colleagues, including the work of High Life Highland, involved in a number of our operational subgroups to help shape and design plans. And obviously the primary focus has been on the reopening of schools and making sure that the buildings are ready as possible, and risk assessments have been undertaken, and operational plans have been in place to inform what the operating model is going to be. I think obviously the engagement of children and young people is important, and that's taken place in a number of forums. And in fact, I've been invited by our colleagues from the voluntary community sector to actually have meetings over the coming weeks with a number of young people forums, which I'll be looking forward to as well, because it's important that the voice of the child, and you won't be surprised to hear me say as a former inspector of local authorities, the voice of the child is crucial to how we inform our systems and our processes and our policies and our strategy. So I'm very much an advocate for the voice of the child playing a role there. And as a result, I've personally undertaken via Myri Wiley to actually meet with a number of young people. And again, if there are other forums where there may be gaps, happy to take a view on that. But thank you for that. With regards to how many councillors are involved in our subgroups, no councillors involved in the subgroups. At this moment in time, I have Councillor Finlayson and Councillor Mackenzie sitting as board members, because the difference between the board and the subgroups definitely would be oversight and governance at the board level. So looking at the data, looking at the outcomes, looking at the impact, as opposed to getting into the operational weeds during the work of the subgroup. But naturally, over time, all of the subgroups will be subject to review and redesign in response to needs. And it may well be that we look to reconfigure the model. But at this moment in time, we have a board that oversees the work of 11 subgroups, and there are no members on the subgroups because of the operational lens that those present. With regards to, I've mentioned about the work of High Life Highland. I was talking to Douglas Wilby yesterday about High Life Highland, and again, their role in supporting our our programs and our work streams. And again, there's some good examples of joint work going on there, which I'm pleased to hear about. In terms of, you mentioned concerns about young people, mental health. I'm having this conversation with the equivalent area committee, and I'd say, Councillor McLean, mental health of our children has come up at every single meeting. It's a consistent theme. It really is. It's a nervous theme in terms of, I mean, we know that our young people will have been off school for a considerable period of time, and that potentially could lead to significant anxiety, depression about going back into schools. And we don't all have to be fans of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to know that before we can get to the place of teaching and learning, that we have to address the foundational needs and the foundational concerns. There's investment, I understand, from Scottish Government to support counselling in schools. There's also some in terms of targeted support going on to address wellbeing. So we will be looking as much as possible when our learners return to schools and settings in August to have some form of standardised approach towards assessment on return to help inform what learning, where the gaps may be as well, and what type of targeted support would be beneficial going forwards. Now, the council recently undertook a staff survey, which saw fantastic response of 4,700 respondees out of a workforce of 9,500. So thinking about the well-being of not just our colleagues in schools and settings, but right across all of our council services, enabling that response, that's fantastic, because it now allows us to be targeted in terms of identifying some of those pressures and thinking about how we can reconfigure support for those folk. With regards to, you asked about St Clement's, all 203 of our schools are working towards now 100% return in August. Councillor McLean, following the recent determination. Previously, yes, we were working with option C, which was 2 meters social distancing, but now the expectation is we work towards 100% business as usual, all learners to return. And we recognise that's not going to be as easy as flicking a switch and making that happen. So lots of conversations, lots of discussions, and it's not just about what's going on in the schools and the settings. As I say, it's all the partner agencies have got a role to play. In fact, Councillor Mackenzie has, in a number of meetings I've been at with him recently, has presented a very helpful challenge, thinking about community interest groups, thinking about during social periods, for example, when our young people may need to leave the school site to get refreshment. How are we going to make sure the communications are in place there? How are we going to support those folk there? So 100% is the figure we're working to. So I'm not, with regards to thinking about 50%, some of the schools did come up short with regards to being able to get to the previous criteria of 50%. And we've done some modelling and forecasting in terms of thinking, well, what are the gaps in terms of helping our schools get to that 50% criteria that we were previously looking at? And that might be additional buildings, that might be additional staff. So we have done that scenario-based planning, but with the greatest respect, the primary focus now is option A, and option B, which is the 50% criteria, is the backstop, is the contingency just in case. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Mackenzie, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. It's partially been overtaken in the last part of that statement. But can you tell me specifically, if I quite agree with the approach that focuses carefully on option A, but if we were to return, if we were to go backwards and we had to go to option C, then it's correct to say that our schools, some of our schools, couldn't cope with a 50% return. What specific work is taking place in our area to identify additional teaching areas?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. It's very true and very accurate according to the data that from the initial assessment of option C, if we are to rely on that as a contingency fallback measure because the R number goes in the wrong direction, if we were to deploy that, then what would that look like? Some of our schools were struggling to meet that criteria for reasons of staffing and physical capability. So we have done some modelling and looking at what additional resources, and I think I set out in the paper that I took to Education Committee last week that initial modelling tells us we'll be looking at a financial gap of about 10 to 12 million to help bridge that gap, not just in terms of staffing, but physical buildings as well, and other support costs that will be required from catering and transport and so forth. So in terms of staffing options, obviously our head teachers are working wonders in terms of thinking about their planning and their processes. We're having conversations with unions. We would have to consider all possible options. I can't comment on the individual plan for each different school because a number of our schools are at different levels. and would require a different response. And they all have additional what I call bridge the gap plans to get there. But each and every school, as I say, a number of our schools, some parts of the authority like Sutherland, for example, I think most schools are close to 100%, which is fantastic. So I can't comment on any one individual school at this juncture. I wouldn't have that data to hand. But if there is a specific school that the query is with regards to, I can find out the information from that bridge the gap plan and feed that back directly.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, this mouse sometimes doesn't work for me. Thank you very much, Chair. And hello, Paul. I can't see you because there's a line right across, but I can hear you. Yes, I had two that I was concerned about. One was St. Clement's, but Angela asked the question on that, but I'm still a little bit nervous about it because of it, you know, how difficult it can be, but I'm sure you will cope with that. The one concern I have is that some parents have told me they're a bit wary and they're not sure they want their children to go back to school. And how do they stand rehome schooling? Also, you know, is it an offence if they don't put them back? I know that people can apply to homeschool, but if there's quite a number, which there may not be, because maybe their concerns will, you know, disappear by then. You know, I myself, I've got 16 grandchildren, 14 in school, and I have to say that I've been really, really pleased with how education has dealt with their schooling. It's been absolutely amazing. The help that they've given to the parents to be able to do it has been just fantastic. But I am concerned when they do return to school, there may be quite a number that are a wee bit nervous, depending on how it turns out. You know, if the pandemic comes back, people will be concerned, and you know, that is a worry. And I know that we've got plan B or plan C in place, but it's still a worry for parents at the moment.
Councillor Patterson, thank you for that comment. And I've not just in this local authority, but before coming to this authority, I was leading a similar programme of work in the London authority with a pan-London brief across 33 authorities. That was a common theme. Will the requests or the demand for home schooling increase? We have no local data at this juncture, Councillor Patterson, to tell us that the demand has increased, but absolutely parents' nervousness and worrying about their children returning back to schools in safe environments. It's going to be at the forefront of their thinking, particularly if they depend on the home environment as well, and if there's shielding going on. We appreciate that. Councillor Adam has made some really good points in several meetings about the use of data and getting that data out there about the Highland specific circumstances. And I think it's a good story. I think it's wise that we look at the Highland unique circumstances. Naturally, our colleagues in the Health and Social Care Board will provide governance of such data. But I think in terms of that dripping out of key data, key facts, and maybe some myth busting can go a long way to providing some of those reassurances. But Councillor Patterson, I would totally agree with you. Where if the data tells us that the demand or the amount of requests for homeschooling increases, then it allows us an opportunity to have some follow-up conversations with these parents to identify what's the origins of their request to wish to go down the homeschooling route. Is there an opportunity to alleviate those anxieties with the use of data and maybe providing a targeted plan of support? But we'll have to wait until the data comes through. But at this moment in time, Councillor Patterson, the numbers don't seem to be causing undue concern by comparison with normal trend for this time of year.
Thank you. On that question, Paul, I'm just wondering whether or not you have plans to have a communications campaign before the children go back to school. I take the point that there will be counselling offered when they're back at school, but to address this anxiety, which I think we're detecting, we're picking it up both from children and parents, is there going to be some kind of targeted communications campaign during the holiday period to try and address these worries?
Okay, Councillor Adam, and again, we're looking at the communications, as I say, the development of frequently asked questions documents specifically for parents and carers will hopefully go a long way to managing their anxieties as well. So that's now available on the website, and I was having a conversation with the chair of the Highland Parent Council Partnership, Mark Gunn, earlier today as well. So we know the discussions are going on between officers and local areas, and over July, parents and carers from that partnership will have an opportunity to meet with a number of people from my subgroups, again, just to get some feedback on, in terms of what's going on, what's it going to look like for the parents and carers. So going on the front foot. But in terms of on our webpage, we'll be looking at use of videos in terms of what it would look like for learners to return to schools as well. So there will be a campaign of some sort, and I'm not saying it's going to have bells and whistles, Councillor Adam, but what I can say to you is that the development of frequently asked questions documents, the use of videos and material, and the use of data, once cleared by our colleagues in the Health and Care Board, and the use of the conversations over the coming weeks with parents and carers, and those forums will hopefully go along to managing those anxieties. And as I said, if the data tells us that there are particular groups or cohorts where there is a need for targeted follow-up and support, then naturally officers will be best positioned to do that with the support of schools as well. But we're in listening mode, and it's an unprecedented time for others. You know, in England, they're talking about, if parents don't send their children back to school in September, using enforcement measures and going down the court proceeding route. You know, the Scottish government thankfully haven't determined that's the direction of travel, but it's something that the Secretary of State for Education in England has been very clear, 100% is expected, otherwise it's enforcement. So we don't wish to go down that route. I think we wish to go down a route that will attempt to work with our parents and carers and understand their starting point and endeavour to get as many of our learners back into school and setting as full-time as possible.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Angela, yeah, Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I listened to your response, Paul, and thank you for it. And I think that at the Education Committee, you mentioned that Jackie Douglas from CALA was also involved. And from what you've told me so far, it's just CALA and High Life Highland that's involved. I still don't know the makeup of the subgroup and what this group's remit is. Is it to do with youth work? Is it, you know, has it got other strands to it? And I would be keen to know exactly what this subgroup is concentrating on. And as I said at the start, if you want help, you need everybody that is dealing with youth work around the table, and not just one or two of the groups. And perhaps your meeting with Mary Wiley from the Highland Third Sector Interface will highlight that to you, because I know that she is well aware of the voluntary youth network and, you know, the great opportunities there are there to work in partnership, because they do want to work in partnership with Highland Council and have indicated that on many occasions, but so far their voice has not been heard. And I will repeat it again, what I said at the Education Committee, that you know, the Benny Higgins and the report, the 60-page report on the Towards a Robust, Resilient, Wellbeing Economy for Scotland, highlights that young people are going to find this so much tougher than any other age group, in that, you know, they are going to find it very difficult to get jobs. And I think that it's incumbent on us as councillors to help in every way we can to keep the economy going, and to give young people, not only through education, but through vocational training, opportunities to have a good future. And through the community development.
Angela, I think probably we're moving on to the recovery kind of phase discussion at that point. I think Paul's made the point that his entire focus really is on getting people back to school.
But so what about those that are not going to go back to school? That's my kind of question, because you'll not get everyone back to school. Can I just ask one more question then, Chair?
Yeah, well, just quickly, yeah.
Okay, I will not carry on with that until the next item, but what some parents have said to me, and some people that work in schools too, is that some of the anxiety which Councillor Patterson has mentioned is that they don't know if school will be safe if they go back, and perhaps that's why they're talking about homeschooling. Do you know if the council are going to look at actually testing all the school staff before school starts in August, so that then at least the staff will have all had their tests, and also parents will be reassured that their children going back will, that they know that the adults will be, have all been tested and don't have COVID. Is that something that we're looking at as a local authority?
Could you answer that one, please, Paul? Testing.
Testing. I can't give you the answer at this juncture. It's, as I say, we've on a weekly basis, the 11 subgroups, which see in excess of 120 people supporting the work of those subgroups. I can't give you the assurance of every conversation that's taken place, but testing, if it's within the gift of the subgroups and our colleagues from public health, and if it's consistent with best practice in other local areas, then naturally we would look at that. In England, it's not part of the agenda at this juncture. So I'm not saying to rule it in or rule it out, but what I would say is that it's a good point. I'll make sure that's forwarded to the relevant subgroup for consideration. But at this moment in time, I can't give you the detail of it's been undertaken. It's not reached my desk as yet, but it's a key recommendation. But it is a good point.
Maybe Peter McPhee will be able to say something about this from NHS Highland. Peter, do you have any information if there are any plans in the pipeline about testing teachers prior to school going back?
Not that I've heard of, Chair. What I can say is that the testing of health workers, particularly in hospitals, is being extended to those providing certain cancer services, those who are providing care for long-term elderly who are hospitalised, and other mental health. So it's actually been restricted within healthcare to specific areas at the moment. There is, of course, a capacity issue with testing. There's another issue in terms of testing of asymptomatic people, in that the tests aren't wholly accurate, and a test is only as good as it is that day. Would there be a requirement for weekly testing, for example, of teachers? So it's not quite as straightforward as just testing them and saying you're in the clear. So it is quite a complex area.
Thank you for that, Peter. That's appreciated.
In terms of Chair, I'd echo that. As I say, at this moment in time, I'm not aware of the Scottish Government position because we've not had a determinant from national government in that space. But I do know in England for the 700,000 teaching staff, it's definitely not on the cards. But and as Peter has said, it is only a snapshot in time. I'm not an advocate against it, but I do know that obviously if we're talking about meeting the needs of a workforce of 3,500 across our local schools, obviously it would be significant resource investment required, but it would obviously provide that assurance, but it would require testing to be done to be optimally effective. If you look at some other industries, we'd require testing 2 to 3 times per week for that to be as accurate as possible. So then you're looking at a system, does the system have capacity to provide in excess of 10,000 tests a week to provide that level of assurance? As I said, I'm not seeking to disagree, because I think obviously the more information we can have, the more data we have, the more assured we can be. But does the system have the capacity to provide 10,000 tests a week?
That's the question. Councillor Mackenzie. No, sorry, I'm getting a sort of negative from you. Okay, there's a hand that was up that wasn't. Thank you all very much indeed. Any further questions for Paul or indeed for Mark Rogers? No. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Paul, and of course you're most welcome to stay on. We're now going to look at the Highland Council local community COVID-19 response, and I'm going to hand over to Di Agnew, the ward manager, who's going to provide us with a report on what the ward, what the council's been doing. And we'll then bring in Rona Fraser and the community representatives. Di, should we start with you?
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yep, okay. I can't see any of you, by the way, but never mind. Oh, you're back now. Good afternoon, councillors. I'll just spin through this presentation, which I hope you can all see at the moment, or not. Is that the case? Can you see it now? Yeah. Yep. Okay. But guess what? My notes have all gone. I may need Alison's help. Alison?
Is Linda still there? Linda, are you there? Still?
Yeah, here.
Okay. We might have a slight issue with Di's notes.
Yeah. So what we can
I'm
do,
sure you know it off by heart, Di.
Yeah, that's what you've lived and breathed it for the last 3 months.
I'll just go for it. I've got some paper notes.
Yeah.
It's not quite how it was meant to happen, but never mind.
Yeah.
So it's best things never work, do they?
there's another option that you could use. Is basically Alison could load your presentation.
It's okay. I'll just go for it. I think I'll just work around it.
I can see it now.
You can see it, which is more than me. Never mind. I'll just. Am I on number 2? Okay. The humanitarian.
Sorry, it's Rona here. Can I tell you we can see your notes as well?
You can see my notes. Well, I can't. Oh, right.
I think it's a better
okay, I think we're on it. We're cooking.
Very good.
We're cooking. Okay, good afternoon again. The humanitarian centres were government assistance centres, which we were asked to set up at the beginning of COVID. They're basically called HACs. They were designed in 2009, and they were more of a physical location. However, with COVID, that wasn't possible because of COVID being requiring people to self-isolate. So we quickly called them community hubs because that seemed friendlier, and we set up these community hubs in various places throughout the Highlands. The hubs have a helpline which employed 30 staff to operate. That began from the 27th of March, and we took over 5,800 calls. There were 10 local hubs set up, and our local hub was set up in Dingwall Academy. We, as ward managers, led the setting up of the teams, and we quickly had to recruit volunteers to run these teams. High Life Highland were excellent in that they put forward a list of possible volunteers who could help us. So at the top of the list, I managed to get my team leader, and together we recruited 16 other volunteers very quickly and put all the procedures in place, the risk assessments, set up the building in conjunction with the Dingwall Academy. We were very lucky that the head teacher there was running an education hub as well, so that helped us to just get things off the ground quickly. The building was operational, and we really we were running very quickly anyway. There's a distribution hub in Inverness, which was based at the big leisure centre. That gave us food deliveries. There was a delay to begin with because everything had to be put in place in order to get these food deliveries. And in the interim, our community response people helped us out, as did the Red Cross, with food until our food came in. There's a virtual hub which deals with the shielding team. It deals with the people who are officially shielding. There are people that have got specific health issues. So as you can see on this slide, that's the number of people that were in our area. So I will move on to the next one. Local arrangements for the Dingwall Hub. It was ongoing support and weekly contact with clients. Many inquiries were for a touch-based reassurance that support was there. Recently, we started also delivering water as there was a drought in Dingwall and the West Coast area. We received goods from Inverness, Core partners, again, were the Highland, and we received referrals from NHS, Adult Social Care, Children and Families Team, Housing Services, including Homeless Support Team, Welfare Team, Red Cross. The Community Hub had close contacts, again, with our voluntary sector, without whom we couldn't have operated. We also provide a prescription service. We also covered Black Isle, Dingwall, Seaforth and the eastern part of the west coast, providing food deliveries, etc. This is really quite a duplicate of what I've already said, so I will just move on. At one point, we were supporting over 100 households per week, and we're currently supporting 39 households with food and support and prescription services. On top of this, we've made referrals to our communities, and they continue to deliver around 50 to 50 households as well. We keep in touch with our community groups just to make sure that everything is okay and offer them support with these clients. We're also working with the NHS on onward help for our most vulnerable clients. Key areas of learning include being able to respond quickly, core emergency response, but adapting to long-term response, partnership commitment and dedication from staff, volunteering, staff and community. The response has been really positive from partners and community partners, and there's been a strong local knowledge within the Hub staff to inform the response. We've been very lucky in our recruitment in that we had 2 couples which helped us to deliver the frozen foods. It meant that people could travel in the same vehicle. We've also been lucky in that we've had a few community learning and development background staff who covered the Dingwall area in their proper day jobs, and this helped us because they knew the community, and they also were able to befriend many of the clients that we have. And these people have now left us and gone back to their own roles, but they've maintained to be befrienders to some of the clients that really needed just a phone call to make sure that they knew there was somebody out there that cared and that they could talk to. We do have to set aside a fair bit of time for this because some of them like to talk longer than others. Opportunities during the development of our hub and the development of our partnership with communities. Stronger partnership working, I think everyone would agree, has taken place. We no longer see barriers boundaries between community councils. Community councils have stepped in and they don't mind where they're delivering to or who they're helping. If somebody needs help, they just do it. And that's the same with all the agencies that we've worked with. Our staff and myself are make more use of IT. I think we've learned a lot from our younger people who have helped us in the hub. We've got a modern apprentice and we've got young people from Highland who are whiz on computers and our IT. So they've been helping us to keep up with things. It gave us a chance to do things differently, certainly from my own perspective and that of the team at the hub. We've all learned different skills. Our team leader is now a transport organiser, a delivery driver, an ordering of goods, lots of skills with people, and it's helped to build a new community confidence to lead initiatives. And this is, you can see this happening in our communities as new groups are being formed, or they're being formed under community councils and the umbrella groups, which Shona and John will tell you about. The next steps are ongoing support for shielding people. This we have to liaise with social services, etc., on how this ongoing support can be determined. At present, there's no confirmation of additional funding to support this, but this has been explored with the Scottish Government, and we hope to discuss this maybe when we get to the recovery part of this agenda. The council's working with communities. Again, it's an impressive community response. The community were active and mobilised immediately we went into lockdown. People were offering to help, and they were out there just helping. The Highland community response, that just gives you the figures of the numbers of people in our area registering to be volunteers. We have talked a bit this morning about volunteer fatigue, which I'm sure we'll come to later as well. But at the beginning, that was some time ago now, people were more than willing to get out there and help, or to be at their homes and work from home and befriend people and organise shopping, etc. Volunteering. I don't want to say too much about this because I'm sure Shona's going to touch on this when she comes through. This is just a slide which gives you an idea of some of the funding that has been attracted to our Black Isle and Dingwall and Seaforth area. This is not a full list, and I'm sure there's lots of other funds that have been attracted throughout the community that perhaps we're not aware of. But we've done okay. Local funding and community support. This is the ward discretionary COVID fund was quickly organised by the council, and I think that was appreciated by everyone. It was a very, very simple award that people just had to contact myself or another ward manager, and they would quickly get £500 out there to help them with delivering food, collecting prescriptions, delivering lunches or chilled food. It's been put to very good use, I would say, by the communities, and that's the others, the resilience funds and HIE, who will follow me. So thank you for listening, and I'd just like to thank all the community councils, all the councillors and all the community groups and the schools and everyone, because it was a true team effort with HIE, NHS, the emergency liaison groups. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Di, for all your work. I think it's greatly appreciated, certainly by the groups that we have contact with, for all your efforts in kind of bringing us all together and providing the support at the hubs. Rona, you're the person who has got the Strengthening Communities Fund, and you're very much at the centre of that, and you've been really important in identifying and supporting so-called anchor organisations. I'd be interested to know how you feel this whole process has proceeded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, indeed.
You can, and you can see me, I hope.
Yes.
I've got a bit of noise going on in the background, so I'm going to make my apologies on that, just in case you hear some very rowdy children who have been warned, but that's what home working has resulted in for me anyway. So thank you for asking me to come along this afternoon and chat to you in a very strange format. I'm looking at my computer and I can't see any of you. Yes, it's interesting times we've found ourselves working through, but I think we've been more fortunate than many living where we do in this wonderful part of the country. So the Supporting Communities Fund, I'm not sure how many of you know much about it. I can give you a bit of an overview of it and then my local experiences. Would you like that? Or do you want me to cut to the chase and just deal with what's happened locally? I'm conscious we've got John and Shona, so there's a bit of context setting in all of this.
Well, I would think keep your introductions fairly brief, Rona. I think probably it's more the local local side of things, which is of interest. I think most of us are familiar with the Supporting Communities Fund because most of us have benefited from that.
Okay, well, if there are any questions, you can always come back to me at the end. I mean, this is obviously something that we got involved with in a very quick way. There was numerous conversations that took place between my colleagues and Scottish Government. In the space of a couple of weeks, we were up and running and knocking on doors, so to speak, with local anchor organisations, some of whom we had an existing relationship with, some of whom we didn't. But what we did do at that stage was work very closely with the local ward managers, who we do have a good relationship with, who between them and Di was very supportive and helpful between them and ourselves and some of the other third sector organisations. We had a good grasp of who was out there and who could potentially deliver directly to the communities, and that was really the whole point of it. It was to get emergency support directly into the local communities and via anchor organisations who were best placed to know the various and numerous groups that were, one, active in these communities, but two, that were also respected and able to react very quickly, to engage and to understand what exactly needed to be done across a number of geographies. So obviously the Inner Moray Firth area where I operate is much wider than the area we're talking about today. But I thought I would just give you some up-to-date figures before I go into the specifics of the local area. So as of today, there was £1.85 million approved directly into Highland region. And of that, there was 66 local anchor organisations that we were having a very close working relationship with in order to distribute these funds. Altogether across the Highlands and Islands, there was 3.6 million and 153 anchors. So I think Highland have done well through this, and we've got a lot of money into the heart of these communities. So in the area in question, what we did was we looked at who we knew, who was active, who we had an existing relationship with, as I said, and also for those areas, it wasn't clear that there were obvious anchors in every one of those geographies. So it took a lot of conversations. Gordon, you and I had several conversations in order to try and understand what was possible, where we could ask for volunteers in most cases to work on behalf of these local areas in order to understand who needed it most, what was needed, to ensure that we didn't duplicate many of the other funds that already existed. The Scottish Government were very clear of that from the start. There was lots of support out there, and we had to make sure we weren't duplicating. We weren't working in areas where there were other funds that had been specifically created to support. But also understanding that there were many families out there who weren't necessarily tapping into support for a number of reasons, but that actually genuinely did need some help at this time. So specifically in the area in question, we developed a relationship with Ross-shire Voluntary Action, who we at the beginning were looking at covering the Dingwall area, Eventon, Conan, Maryborough, Strathpeffer, Conton and Alness, but not long after the monies got approved for that particular patch, Alness had a change of thought and decided that they actually could deliver some funds themselves. So Shona worked very well with us to make sure that Alness were able to do what they needed to do. We also we chatted around what needed to be done. Shona very quickly got on the phone, got in contact with all of the community I suppose, the main players in the communities, those that were in touch with a number of different organisations, different groups who were very well networked and well placed to understand what was needed for that geography. And they were awarded 51.5 roughly £1,000. Again, 10 of that was for illness. But that was essentially to distribute meals and food parcels and support that was necessary for people who were in the shielding or the isolating categories, as well as those families who really did find themselves in financial challenge. And I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because I don't want to steal Shona's thunder on that piece. But also similar conversations with the Black Isle Partnership. And Gordon, this is obviously your neck of the woods. And I think what we found coming forward, they were a wee bit later to the table than the other organisations, but by which time they had come up with a whole number of potential ways of supporting that geography. And many of those areas were looking at the emergency needs, but also the recovery stages. And we were quite specific in our instructions from Scottish Government. This had to be emergency and emergency only. So lots of work being done around fuel, food, well-being support, those people who potentially were feeling the most isolated and needing some real digital support in order to help them feel less on their own and be able to engage in a lot more detail. But I talked a little bit about recovery, and I know we're not going on to recovery at this stage, but what was clear from the work from Black Isle Partnership is there's lots of thinking going on. Out of adversity comes opportunity, and I think, you know, well, I'll come back to that once I've talked about Muir of Ord as well. So Muir of Ord's the other area that is in this geography that we're talking about today. And again, we had an existing working relationship with Muir of Ord Development Trust, and they, working collectively with Move Food, were able to bring a whole host of different projects to the table that they felt would benefit that area, benefit the families in question, be able to support the children, so parents who were maybe struggling with really some of the basics in order to do the homeschooling, to support their kids at a really difficult, challenging time. And from that, I have developed a pop-up swap shop, things like school supplies, activities that they could potentially do with their families, DVDs and other forms of entertainment. I think that's a really good example that can be copied and basically shared across areas. And they in turn were looking at a much wider area than where they currently operated. So they were looking to take in Mulbuie, Strathconnan, Marybank, so the surrounding areas that maybe their reach didn't quite stretch in their day-to-day operations. But what we found is there were lots and lots of volunteers pitching in, coming on board, and that, I can say, was seen across our whole patch. Lots of organisations who wouldn't normally have been operating such a way had a real reason to bring communities together to deal with a real crisis. And I think what we're seeing coming out of this is much deeper relationships with many more organisations who I certainly see we have a role going forward to work alongside them, to support them further, to see how much more they could potentially do. Obviously supporting them to avoid that volunteer fatigue. We hear that regularly in the communities field. But actually many people will have got involved where they wouldn't necessarily have had the confidence before or a reason to do so. And it's how we harness that, support it, and actually work on what opportunities we can take forward going forward. And I mean, certainly, you know, Black Isle Partnership, Gordon, you and I have had conversations about what more we could do going forward now that we have that relationship in place. So I feel like I've given you a feel for what we were doing. I feel like I've given you a feel for how we've we've supported and the monies that were distributed, but being clear here that this was Scottish Government money. We distributed to these anchor organisations who were a conduit to their local community groups. They weren't approving applications. There was none of that going on. This was straightforward. Communities needed money. They highlighted why they needed money, and the money was distributed where possible to these groups in order to provide that emergency response. Happy to go into a huge amount more detail on that fund, but I'm not sure you need that.
Well, I'm sure we can pick up one or two of these things, and particularly the importance of community and how communities have been strengthened and the possible opportunities that may emerge from that. Maybe you could turn to John and then to Shona to get the response from the community level on how you have interacted, if you like, with HIE and with the support that was so rapidly forthcoming through HIE from the Scottish Government. What's worked, John, and what have been your frustrations?
Hello, thank you, Gordon. Sorry, there's always that delay when you have to find your button for the mute, isn't it? Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me along to this. Fascinating insights to see the council operating at this level. Some of you might know me from buying cheese from me, but I'm happy here in my role as chair of the Black Isle Partnership. But in my former career as a theatre director was the last time I was in a meeting where the phrase co-production was raised. Yeah, again, but it's absolutely apt, and I think it's very appropriate. And certainly in my theatre days, it was all about pooling resources and making the most of the talent available and pooling expertise. And I think that's certainly relevant to our discussions today. Very briefly, I think we've already heard, certainly from Di and Rona. Are you still hearing me? You've frozen, Gordon.
No, I'm here.
You're still there, right? Yeah. I'll assume everyone else is. Yeah, the local response on the Black Isle was pretty immediate and extremely impressive. And one of the reasons why things were happening on the ground so quickly was that we're very fortunate to have Black Isle Cares and Cromarty Care Project, who are both were already providing a lot of the kind of assistance that was needed, and it was simply a case of them expanding their operations. And also, it has to be said that, Gordon, you're bringing together of all the community council representatives and those other organisations like Cromarty Care Project and Black Isle Cares on a weekly basis, which I think you started something like the 15th of March or even sooner, before the lockdown even happened. And that was a brilliant move and started the ball rolling. In terms of bringing in the Black Isle Partnership, we came at the request of those communities who were looking for an anchor organisation to represent the whole area. To be honest, the Black Isle Partnership had for some time been a bit of a sleeping organisation, really. Its only remit over the last few years had been to support the tourism group and to provide a formally registered company for the tourism group to operate under. But as soon as it was mooted that maybe the Black Isle Partnership was the most appropriate kind of pan-Black Isle organisation with the right kind of constitution, the four directors, Gordon being one, myself, Vanessa Hallhead, who's chair of Scottish Rural Action that some of you might know, and Julian Parran, who's treasurer of Transition Black Isle. We hit the ground running, really, and within a week we had kind of reformed and took the decision to employ someone on a part-time basis, irrespective of whether we got any funding via HIE or others. We advertised, we drew up a job description, advertised shortlisted and interviewed and then employed within 7 days, which was quite impressive. So I've mentioned HIE, so that was assumed that we had a good chance of getting funding from them. As Rona's talked about, we on the Black Isle were maybe being a bit too strategic. I think it has to be said that you know, what we've learned through this crisis is generally the demographic of the Black Isle population is reasonably prosperous. We don't have huge numbers of people in crisis. 30% of the population is over retirement age. So financially, a lot of the population have actually been okay through this, but which was why our focus was more on supporting businesses who were losing income and those individuals, and things like well-being. But through a process of discussion with HIE, we did finalise and hone it down, and we're in a fortunate position that we are spending that money frugally, and you know, because it's a 6-month grant, we're projecting ahead and envisaging that that will be useful to us in the next few months as well. What else can I say on that? I think again, it's been worked on, and the weekly meeting from this morning, which I have to say there was 16 present, and that's been pretty standard for the last few months, which in itself is pretty impressive. This whole notion of volunteer fatigue was raised, and particularly concerns about the fact that, you know, we could be looking at a second spike come the autumn, and how do we deal with that? One of the ways that we can prevent that, and the Black Isle being a popular destination for visitors, and we're concerned, certainly it's already started to happen, and I think from next week we will see even more so people heading for the Black Isle for holidays, which I understand are much needed, but there is obvious anxiety within the local communities. So one of the things we've been involved in very intensively over the last 10 days or so is to pull together a campaign which will have roadside banners and posters that residents can print off and stick in their windows with 4 key messages, which are to support local business, but respect local needs. And what are the 2 others? Gordon, you might be able to
Don't ask me.
Stay apart and keep connected. And they're maybe, you know, as people will know in these kind of campaigns, they're necessarily sort of vague, but there's links to much further information on websites and things. But the key being for people to respect what they're coming to, and the bottom line was felt it's one of those situations where it's better to do something rather than nothing, and it's important with people coming to the Black Isle area that they can see that there is a strong community here who I'm sure will get behind this and put out. So if you've got a strong message that you are a strong community, then you're going to gain more respect for that, I think, I hope. I'll just say Visit Scotland are very interested to use that as a model of good practice, which might be of benefit for other areas, although I'm fully aware that other areas within the North Highland have done something similar. The final point, to come back to this notion of the second spike and the potential for that, and the volunteer fatigue. Again, Vanessa, one of the directors, was raising the point this morning that they're going to Scottish Rural Action will be making it very clear to Scottish Government that one of the main things we need to learn from all this is that the community, the local people, are the best placed to respond in a situation like that. But you cannot expect that to be purely voluntary. And going forward, it might be very, very good and helpful to consider financial support for actually employing people as community liaison in those kind of roles. Okay.
Thank you, John, very much indeed. One or two interesting points to come out of that. But I think before we go into discussion, can I just ask Shona to say a few words about Rochester Voluntary Action? Shona.
Hello, Gordon. Hello, everyone. It's more or less, I will be repeating what has been said before, more or less. I would definitely support what John was saying about the community support. That was truly amazing how quickly communities in the area responded to the needs of their local communities, neighbours helping neighbours, etc. Going on to the HIE funding, I mean, thank you, HIE, for being there and distributing the funds, because without them, I think we would be in a worse state than we are. So what has funding helped in the local area? It has helped to distribute food, and I think the main thing is that groups who are applying for funding and distributing the funding, so if I have one example that I would like to use is Food Share in Dingwall. What it has allowed them to do is predict what they can do in the future, helping going through this crisis and changing what they deliver as well. It has given them some confidence to do that, which is great, and they're helping more people because of that. Other communities have done similar to Food Share, delivering food. There has been a number of requests for that funding, all COVID related and supporting communities. So a great thanks going out to the organisations who have actually done that. Volunteers, yes, there is volunteer fatigue, but there also is a vast number still willing to volunteer. And I think it's how we look at how we rotate the volunteers that we're using, and using the resources that are out there, because there are some volunteers who have come forward who haven't been used yet. And I think we have to look at that going forward, how we share the burden, I think, of volunteers. One thing we have noticed as an organisation, we support with governance, and quite a few community organisations have approached us about changing what they deliver, and it is in response to COVID and what they see helping the community going forward. And I think at that stage, I think I've more or less filled in the gaps, but just reiterating, and can I just say, I need to reiterate how supportive Di Agnew has been. She has enabled shielded people to access food where it wouldn't have happened without her. So thank you, Di, for the support that you've given to enable us to do that.
Thank you, Shona. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, one point that is really interesting, that so much has emerged about the potential of community action, and the way in which communities have been energized by this crisis. And of course, the big challenge is to keep that going. And I suppose almost inevitably, when you get communities involved, you get ideas emerging which are not covered by the funds which are provided, by the Scottish Government through HIE. And I think a slight frustration that we found was that there's lots of stuff we wanted to do, but we couldn't do it because the Supporting Communities Fund didn't support that. And I think that's a wider question which needs to be answered in the future. If communities come up with stuff which is genuinely grassroots and well thought through, there needs to be some way in which they can be funded rapidly in order to do that. But a very specific question for you, Rona, is there going to be a Supporting Communities Mark II fund, which will perhaps be more focused on recovery?
Well, I was just about to jump in there if you hadn't asked me that, Gordon. So what I would say is there was two parts to that question. Or there was a statement I'm going to answer as if it is a question. Yeah. So we've heard, I think Paul talked about the learning or the education ecosystem earlier. We also have a communities ecosystem. There is a whole plethora of different organisations out there who support, from the very ideas generation right through to social enterprises that anybody on the street would think were, you know, fairly large and robust businesses. And there's a whole support system out there. So what you're suggesting about communities coming up with ideas, whether it was before this or because of this, there are organisations out there, whether that is initially through SCVO or whether it's through the TSIs, through Just Enterprise, leading on to ourselves. There's a whole myriad of different organisations out there, but I understand that it can be a bit complicated at times, but we are all working together so that really, no matter which route you go in through, you should get to the right place. I mean, I regularly have organisations or groups coming to me looking for some support, and I direct them to Just Enterprise, who have seed corn funding that can help them take those ideas and progress them. So that's already happening. But in direct answer to the Supporting Communities Fund Phase 2, I mean, it was always part of a bigger fund, as you all know. There was a substantial chunk of that money spent, but not all of it. High are working very closely with the Scottish Government and a number of other organisations who are helping shape and advise the Scottish Government as we speak. They meet at least weekly, if not more so, to agree and formulate what the next phase will look like. I cannot sit here today and say there definitely will be one. I'm pretty confident there will be. How it will look, we do not know. Who will deliver it? Again, we don't know that. But certainly these organisations are putting forward their ideas. They're putting forward what they would potentially do if they had additional money to do it. And it would be some of the stuff that you have suggested that the communities are starting to think about now, come forward with their ideas. How do you harness some of these potential projects and run with them? Well, they can't do it just utilising the skills of volunteers. They need to do it with a bit more robust processes and models in place. So we are confident that we might know more in the next week or two. But certainly the Scottish Government have, I would imagine from what I'm hearing, bombarded with a whole number of potential ideas that would certainly be highly attractive to us in this area.
Thank you, Rona, very much for that clarification. Angela, do you have a question?
Yes, I've got a few, Chair, if that's
Could
okay.
you make it fairly rapid, Angela, because I'm just conscious that we've kept poor Malcolm and Peter hanging on for a long time. So if we have maybe have the main discussion after the next presentations, but a quick question if right now is fine.
Okay, Rona, thank you very much for your presentation. And although we concentrated on supporting communities, you also deal with supporting businesses as well, local businesses throughout our ward as well. My questions are, you talked about the importance of anchors, what anchors there were in the communities, and working with Rossshire Voluntary Action and Shona and our colleagues. And I wondered, are there communities that have not come forward to to support? I mean, I know there's stuff happening in all communities, but has there been any areas, for instance, say Maryborough or Coninbridge, where that's in my ward, where perhaps there hasn't been that take up that was perhaps expected? Although I do know that some stuff is happening, and I know there was mention about community capacity building, and I know that in those areas that have been talked about, there has been community support. There's been that expertise in the community to come forward with complex applications. And my other was on the Highland Food, the Highland Poverty Action Group, which has been set up, which helps to signpost people, and that's through the Highland Third Sector interface as well. And they've got a lot of information and groups. And what's concerned me really is the amount of vulnerable people that are actually in our community that are so close to the poverty line. And I think that given the First Minister mentioned today that there's been a 40% increase in applications to the welfare fund in the last few months, shows how difficult a time it is for us. So I'll stop there and I'll keep the rest to Malcolm. Chair.
I can't answer all of that, Angela, but I'll do my best on some of it. So we feel that across our geography, we've got a local anchor organisation in place that covers everywhere. And if we haven't, that has not been at any point highlighted to us, and no one has come forward. So there was a press release went out. So we did a very quick piece of work with other third sector organisations to identify who exists where, that would be able, how they're set up to distribute these funds. And but we also then went out with a press release and no one came forward. Now, the area in question that you raised is covered by the Ross-shire Voluntary Action. So again, Shona might be able to answer that, but I know Conan certainly has benefited. I'm not aware of Maryborough benefiting in any way yet, but I dare say it depends on what is the need. You know, I live in Marybank. I know Muirvord covers my area. I haven't seen anything locally, but I am told that the information is being shared, but I haven't seen anything come forward that has been needed. So I guess it depends on who is living in these geographies, what groups are operating, what they're doing, and what support they need. You also mentioned that we work with businesses, absolutely, and I had intended to talk about that as well, but I was specifically asked about the Supporting Communities Fund. So the business fund that we had been dealing with very quickly was the Pivotal Enterprise Resilience Fund. I know this has had a lot of publicity, probably not all maybe as positive as we would have liked, as comes with all of these funds. Whilst the application process has closed, the appeals process only closed on Friday. So we're still working through that at the moment. And what I've been advised is that the ministers are wanting to make an announcement on that. So I'm not at liberty to go into any detail on that fund at this time. All I would say is that we in the Inner Moray Firth area have had a substantial amount of applications, you know, nearing 300 applications from a whole number of different sectors, industries and scale of businesses. And, you know, it's been a very demanding, busy time, let's say. I also worked on that fund, so I finished on the Supporting Communities Fund, left some of my team continuing with that, and went straight into the Pivotal Enterprise Fund, and it was far busier than I think we could have ever imagined. But certainly the impact of that will be shared, I believe, any day now.
Thank you very much, Rona. Craig.
Thank you, Gordon. This was just Angela actually picked up something I'd actually written down, and basically what I think this whole episode shown is that how That's it. What this episode is showing is how vulnerable families and people are that did not think they would ever be vulnerable and need assistance. And from a financial services background, I used to see people who were probably 1 or 2 paychecks away from some severe financial heartache. And I think with the organisations that we've got through High Council, Rocha Voluntary Action and BIP, it's given these people assurance and that as long as they can get to a point of contact from whichever area through a councillor or a third sector interface to put them in the right place, then that seriously helps them out. But I think there's a lot of families, once this has gone away, and people will be seriously sitting down and thinking, I don't want to go through this again. What do I need to do to make myself or my family more resilient should something like this happen again? And I think that could be part of a discussion on the recovery phase, that people that are in fragile positions or fragile jobs, help them potentially cover that should this all happen again. So it's just an observation, and Angela picked up on that point.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Craig. That does actually bring us neatly on to recovery. And I'd like to turn to Malcolm, who is going to talk about rebooting the Highland economy. Malcolm is the Executive Chief Officer for Infrastructure and the Environment, and he, in a way, is leading the Highland charge on that. Malcolm, I think the conversation has come naturally around to recovery, concern about business and a lot of local worries, I think, about this, which we've picked up, certainly, almost a longer lasting worry than the emergency response phase of lack of food and so on. So this is, in a way, what these big issues are what you're grappling with. Would you like to just give us a quick outline of where you're at?
Yeah, thank you, members, and thank you, Chair. So I'll just crack on. I've got a few notes here that I'm just going to go through just to kind of set out the picture of where we are. And I had hoped to have some more detailed stats on the area, so they might come while I'm speaking, but just bear with me. So obviously throughout this whole period, it's been, as you've heard and know yourselves very keenly, it's been a really challenging time. We've been dealing with recovery in many ways, almost as a constant. So you're well aware of the grant support that we've been dealing with. Across Highland, we put out around £67 million to 6,000 different applicants, or just over 6,000 different applicants. That grant programme is finishing on the 12th of July. So there have been an awful lot of support, and whilst given out through the Scottish Government that we've been administering, and that's brought with it its own challenges. We've tried to operate as much discretion as we could have, and we've been constantly checking in with Scottish Government officials as to the rules, and there have been a number of changes, and it's been particularly pleasing to see some of the particular pressures for Highland area, that were brought in as amendments, the B&B element to the fund, but there are still a number of businesses that have fallen through the gaps, and we have been liaising closely with HIE to try and operate a system of knowing which areas have fallen through the gaps. So we can't underplay the support that's going to be required for the businesses, for all businesses of all scales. What we're trying to do just now is put together that recovery plan. So that recovery plan has a number of different elements. Obviously, there's operational elements that mean we've got to react quickly. So, for example, we put out a guide for businesses, particularly those in the hospitality trade, about use of outdoor spaces. And that's got quite a lot of good response thus far. And I suspect as things go on, I was just looking out the window and seeing the rain tipping down, but you know, I do think, particularly for this summer, that there will be a growing number of businesses that want to utilise outdoor spaces. So we're trying to be as receptive as possible to that by bringing together the licensing elements, the roads elements, and the planning elements, and trying to use as much discretion as possible to allow people to use outdoor spaces. The spaces for people work that you're well aware of, we've been progressing that. We've been lucky enough to get £1.9 million to date to implement the Spaces for People programme. It raises a few challenges in terms of the conflicts there are between car use and widening pavements. But that is the purpose of it, because it's getting that confidence for our town and city centre, getting that confidence of people to be able to go in and feel that they can socially distance, as well as building on the opportunity in terms of active travel to get people back into our centre. So we're racing ahead with that, and you know, the Dingwall changes are largely, for example, around the 20 mile an hour scheme, but there will be some changes to the streetscape just to give that space for social distancing. We're also preparing, along with Skills Development Scotland, DWP and HIE, you know, for the immediate unemployment challenges. I think we've got to be realistic about that. And, you know, we are trying to work as hard as possible to make sure there's a coordinated approach to the fallout of this, and you know, particularly the immediate fallout. In terms of opening up, you know, we've been looking at, you know, the car parks have been closed. I think all of the car parks are now open again, and as well as working across the council in terms of toilets, etc. So these are the kind of operational issues, and they've brought with them their own wee challenges. But I think the big challenge is going to be around strategic recovery, you know, the longer term recovery. So what we've been doing around here, first of all, Councillor McLean mentioned the Benny Higgins report. And, you know, we've been looking at although the government hasn't made a formal response yet, we have been trying to look at what that will mean for Highland and for our more rural areas, and working again with HIE. We've been having regular weekly meetings with HIE over the period, as well as update meetings with Chambers of Commerce, with SCDI, with a whole host of different groups that have relevance. The recovery board's been set up by the council, as you know, and economic recovery is a big part of that. But I think importantly, what we've got to do is recognise that we can only achieve recovery through partnership working. And, you know, rebooting the Highland economy was the title of this agenda item, and I think it absolutely needs us to reboot the working relationships, if I can put it like that, or working arrangement perhaps is a better way of putting it, amongst the key agencies across the Highlands. And actually I've been really encouraged by a lot of the work coming out, whether that's working with NHS on projects or working with HIE. So we're moving ahead with that, and an economic partnership has been set up, the first meeting of which will happen tomorrow. And that's being chaired by Councillor Christie, and Alistair Dodds will be involved as chair of HIE, but it is also represented. We also have representation from Donna as chief executive and Charlotte at HIE, and the intention is for that economic partnership to look at the immediate response elements that I touched on, and particularly around unemployment support, skills, training. But then also to influence nationally what funding might be available, and to do that from the bottom up, to make sure we're doing it with local priorities across Highland. And that's why meeting with the committee today, which I'm doing right across the Highlands, is so important to get a feeling of what local priorities are, so that we can feed these things up. We've tried to sort of take a kind of sectoral approach. So The third sector and community side of things is absolutely critical within it. But also some of the things you would expect, the construction, infrastructure side, tourism and culture, looking at low carbon is a really important part around energy and renewables, rural land use and marine initiatives, and technology and innovation, as well as retail, town and city centres. Because the fear is one of the areas we are going to find a really big impact in is within our town centres, which won't surprise anyone because there's been in some ways you can call it a losing battle against online for a long time. So we've really got to look at how we reinvent it and look at opportunities for regeneration, bringing people back living in town centres and within the city centre. So that sector approach kind of overlooks everything, but we're also hoping to identify a prospectus of capital projects, because I do think there will be an injection of funding. There has to be, whether that's led by our own more modest capital programme, but I think it's important we align as far as possible with what's coming out from government, whether that's Scottish Government or UK Government. And in doing that, what we're trying to do is focus on, I think, 3 areas. One is the low carbon agenda, whether that's around energy, renewables, or indeed around active travel, new ways of travelling and relating to renewable energy, electric vehicles, that whole side of things. So low carbon's a really, really important driver for us. And if you read the Benny Higgins report, if you read the SCDI report that's about green recovery, I think that is going to be something we're all going to have to get used to trying to place our projects within, and it makes sense for so many good reasons. The second one is digital inclusion. I think one of the lessons we've learned as a resilient area of the UK and of Scotland is the need for us to be digitally connected. We saw the huge transformation there's been both just within the council in terms of having a move from the 14th of March or whatever date it was, having 9,000 people working in offices and depots to having 7,000 people working from home, and the challenge that gave us all, and I'm sure we all remember them with fondness in terms of just the difficulties of connecting. So I think where again the messages seem to be, and I think particularly for the Highlands, we've got to make a huge push to make sure digital inclusion is built from the outside in, and I think there's an open door there for us to do that. So we've got to be thinking about these connections in our projects, about trying to make sure that digital element is built in. And the third one is just what I was talking about earlier, about partnership working. We've got to demonstrate that the benefits, we've seen it with the community response, which has been fantastic. And I think we've got to do it with our economic recovery. It's about trying to find the linkages, which makes most sense for us to join in with both our agency partners, but also the community sector. So that's the work we're doing. In terms of the committee's area, I'm really interested in feedback from members, whether it's today or going forward, about some of the projects that are happening online, because as an area committee, it would be great if we could come up with a prospectus of projects that we can get visibility on, but more importantly, that we can try and navigate our way through what sometimes are some of the barriers in terms of funding or in terms of partnership arrangements that can bring them forward.
Thank you very much indeed, Malcolm, for that really useful overview, and thank you for the challenge that you're throwing down to us to come up with some projects which I'm sure will be taken on board by all of us. Before we go into discussion, I know there are 1 or 2 members who would like to ask questions. I would like to bring in Peter McPhee, because all of this is dependent upon health, upon disease, upon COVID not returning. NHS Highland has a particular responsibility in this respect. And in particular, the immediate concern I have is one of reassurance, reassurance of the local communities about the influx of tourists, in particular. And my own particular bugbear, I suppose, is health communication and how that is being managed. So, Peter, would you like to just give us a very quick update of where NHS Highland is in its emergency response?
Yes, indeed, Chair. Thanks very much. And first of all, my thanks to you for the invitation to address this committee this afternoon. I've found the discussions very interesting, actually. I've just written down a few bullet points, which will guide me through the next few minutes in terms of pointing out where we are at the moment and what our plans are for the weeks and months ahead, so that we can deal with whatever is coming down the track towards us in terms of COVID and other challenges. So where are we at the moment? Cumulatively across Scotland to date, there have been 281,000 tests carried out. That's both through the NHS and through the UK government testing programme. Of those, 18,300 have proved positive, which is a rate of about 6.5%. Within Highland, and when I say Highland, this is NHS Highland, which of course includes Argyll and Bute, we've had 375 positive cases. I think that the timing of the lockdown was very much to Scotland's advantage, and it was particularly to Highland's advantage in terms of the lack of community disease that was prevalent then and what we've seen since. So I really do think in terms of timing, we want to watch there. Will that continue? It's doubtful. As the lockdown restrictions are lifted phase by phase, then the anticipation is that we'll certainly see an increase in positive cases for whatever reason. But that will be folk coming into our area, be it tourists or others who are able to now move about and mix within the communities, and that's only natural. So what can we do about that? The government strategy, test, trace, isolate and support, or shortened now to test and protect, is where we are focusing our attention just now from a public health perspective. What that means in practice is that we have trained a number of people to carry out contact tracing. Now, we did this to a certain extent during the initial containment phase, where we were still trying to suppress the spread of the virus within our communities. But we are now back at that. So that means that if there is a positive case identified, then the health protection team and the additional staff who have been trained to do this will carry out inquiries with that positive case and identify any unprotected close contacts that they've been in touch with while they've been in the incubation period. Those contacts will then be contacted and they will be advised or required to go into self-isolation for a period of 14 days. Now, that's whether they remain asymptomatic and perfectly well. Obviously, if they develop symptoms, then they should then go and get tested themselves. So that might provide some challenges for us, particularly if we're talking about tourists who have come into the area. A family, for example, one of them tests positive. The remaining members of the family would be considered to be close unprotected contacts and would have to self-isolate. So there's an issue straight away in terms of care for people. Where would they go? How would they be supported? And certainly we've heard of the excellent work of the local community hubs since we've moved into lockdown for providing support to vulnerable people and those who are on the shielding list. And certainly the consensus is that it would be an extension of the existing arrangements in relation to that. The test and protect strategy replaces the sort of universal lockdown across Scotland, and we're hoping that we would be able to monitor and control any spread of the disease if there are local clusters or outbreaks, such as we're seeing in Dumfries and Galloway at the moment. The contact tracing is taking place there. Extra restrictions compared with the rest of Scotland are put in place to see if we can stop the spread of disease. Hopefully that will be successful, but we have to consider the prospect of a second wave, particularly in timing wise, if that is in tandem with the normal winter flu season. There are some advantages, I suppose, that if social distancing and hand washing, which appears to be quite prevalent at the moment, if that continues into the winter months, then we might see less winter influenza hitting us. But again, we may not. So these things are all up in the air. If there is a return of COVID in big numbers within our community, then inevitably we will see some, if not all, of the lockdown measures put back in place, so that the NHS does not become overwhelmed, and we try and control the disease that way. I think the reality of the situation is that second or subsequent wave or not, we're all going to have to learn to live with COVID in our midst, certainly until a viable treatment is identified or a vaccine. And there again, it would depend on society in general taking up the vaccine. And I was reading today that there's indications that up to 30% of people might be averse to having the vaccine, which personally I don't understand, but that's a matter of personal preference. The wider risks in terms of COVID that we face, and we've already mentioned some of them this afternoon anyway. There's obviously been a massive impact on routine health services. So we were operating as every board and trust across the UK in the NHS service under pressures to provide the healthcare which we all deserve, and there will be an inevitable backlog of health services to address in the coming months, if not years. We do have particular concerns about mental health issues, which we've discussed earlier. Bereaved families, for example, families under increasing pressures such as financial, the inability to grieve properly for those that have been lost, staff fatigue. There are many of our organisations, our staff have really stepped up to the plate, but we can't expect them to do that forever. And things are going to be really busy in the coming weeks and months, with or without COVID. So staff fatigue and staff well-being is a real area of challenge for us, and certainly we've put in a lot of measures to try and support staff as much as we can. There's one other elephant in the room in terms of Brexit. Certainly as a resilience officer, I spent many months last year in terms of Brexit planning and all the potential implications, medical supplies, PPE, and so on. Took up much of our time last year, and we could be in a similar position in the coming weeks in terms of Brexit. So I just throw that into the equation, that it's not all COVID where the challenges might come from. So what are the NHS doing about this? Certainly each health board has been required to submit remobilisation plans to outline how they intend to get back on stream in terms of delivery of routine services. Now that does not mean that we'll be going back to the way we worked before, and there have been lots of good things and good learning has come out of the last 4 months. And we do see some excellent opportunities. There is going to be really hard work lying ahead for us, but we can take advantage of new and alternative systems that have been put in place, which is all designed to enhance the delivery of care and the patient experience. We do serve a remote and rural community here in Highland, and the use of technology and digital platforms in terms of how we reach out and engage with our patients, customers, clients, there are real opportunities there. Again, we can reduce our carbon footprint if we can cut down on travel, so folk that can have some form of remote audience with a GP, for example, rather than carrying out a trip of several miles duration. It can only be for the better of the patient, less time, and improvement in the environment. So there's a lot there that can certainly be of benefit in the future. We continue to work on our remobilisation plans, and indeed we had a workshop last week looking at various disciplines and how they are going to enact that, and that's a continuing process. We have to submit our next plan by the end of this month, and we will do so. Chair, you mentioned communications, and communications is at the very heart of any response, and particularly one of this scale and nature, the likes of which none of us have seen in our lifetime. A lot of the NHS communication comes nationally, and we disperse that as we see fit across our communities here. I think there has been some excellent work on the multi-agency basis, and again there's been reference made to that through the local resilience partnerships. Di mentioned the local emergency liaison groups, and there's the Highland Care for People group as well, chaired by Leslie Webber. And again, these structures have all enabled the appropriate communication to be made between the agencies on a regular basis. Many of these groups were meeting at least weekly, although some of them have now moved to fortnightly or monthly, but we are ready to step back up to more frequent meetings should that be required. But an excellent line of communication, multi-agency communication, is provided through these forums. We also communicate with the public, and that will continue. Certainly, I spoke, Chair, with our own comms department following our own discussions last week, and certainly throughout the piece there's been very close liaison between NHS Highland and Highland Council in terms of public messaging, and we see that absolutely continuing in the weeks and months ahead. So I'll just pause there. I'll just put the caveat before I offer to answer questions that, one, I'm not a clinician, and two, I don't have any particular knowledge about your own areas in terms of the Black Isle, Seaforth or Dingwall. But if I can't answer a question, I'll certainly undertake to find somebody that can.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. That was a very interesting perspective, which unfortunately we haven't heard too much from the NHS Highland. So it was good to have you here, and we do appreciate you coming along. The communication thing does interest me, and I'm particularly interested because I think the nature of the pandemic in the Highlands has been somewhat different from most other parts of Scotland. And I personally feel that there should be much more Highland-specific communication, to be perfectly honest. And I'm not sure who's doing that. I'm not sure you are. I'm not sure the council is. And I think there should be more of it. That's my own personal observation, because I think we have very specific problems here. And they should be addressed, but that's a big topic of conversation. I don't want to dominate I don't want to dominate this particular forum with that. There are a number of people who would like to ask questions. I forget it's not clear to me who was first, but perhaps I could come to you, Margaret, first. Margaret Patterson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Peter. That was really very telling words. and very challenging, but we all know that life is a big challenge, and even more so now. But some of the things you said, you know, touched home, and I really enjoyed what you said to us. Malcolm MacLeod, that was an excellent report, and I fully agree with you that, you know, we have to navigate support for the different businesses, and there's different ways to do it. I think verbal is very important. Last Monday was my first day out, and that was the day that Dingwall opened their shops. And I walked down one side of the high street and back down the other side, and tried to speak to most of the traders and give them support, because I think it's so important. And today I went down to the caravan site, and they have opened, and they've got a few customers, which they're, you know, delighted to see, and they've got everything in place. And they say that, you know, it is a challenge, but they're pretty well booked for August, and hopefully everything will go all right. Now, my question is, well, this morning I went down to get my season ticket at Ross County and had to wait outside for a while, and a few people walked by and they were asking, when are you going to be widening the pavements? And also the paths are too narrow, because for social distancing, you really don't have a chance once you start on the path, because the grass is so long at the side of the paths. So we have got quite a bit of work to do. And I wonder, you know, how we choose and get the money to get all this work, and especially the pavements, because there's quite a number of areas that really do have to get their pavements in some way made larger, because they're far too narrow, and we have to widen them, and that's not easy. So I don't know when this work is going to start, because I presumed, and so do most of the people, that it would be the same time as the shops were opening. Because if you've got a queue outside the shop, because they're only allowing 2 in at a time, then where do the people that want to pass by, how can they pass by? They can't always have to dart across the street because cars are going down. And so I wondered, Malcolm, if you could give me an answer to these questions. Thank you.
Okay, Margaret, I think I'll take Angela and Craig as well, and then we'll get Malcolm to answer these questions.
That's a good idea.
Angela.
You'll regret this.
We're going to put a limit of questions on you, Angela.
I know you
Maximum
keep
of
limiting
3.
me when I go. Oh, that's well, to each person. Okay. So, Paul, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, not Paul. Peter. Thank you very much for your presentation. My questions are on carers. You talked about difficulty going to appointments in Rehome, and I wondered perhaps Shona might know this, because I know that she was very much involved with the car scheme. Hospital appointments, are you looking at carers? Can they go into the ambulance with the patient? I know that couldn't happen before, but given now with a number of the restrictions when you get to hospital, could the carer be able to go in the ambulance with the patient that's going for the appointment, rather than having to go separately and organise other transport? Also about social prescriptions, there's going to be a lot more work on outdoors, and a number of our doctors do social prescriptions, and I wondered, have you got maybe an idea of how that will change over the coming months, or you know, especially in our area, because being outdoors and working outdoors and joining some of the walking clubs, as we've seen more people out walking, which goes back to Malcolm's bit about spaces for people. You know, do you see that changing over the months as we come out of resilience? And thank you for what you were saying on public health. And my third question to Peter is about social care, because one of the very things that have come out of this, and I'm sure Di would mentioned it too, is how many people in our community are needing support, even if it's just a little bit. And will there be changes to social care as we move forward? And if so, because you've got a really good group on the Black Isle, the Black Isle carers that support the community, but that's not available in all our communities. And I wondered, you know, is there going to be any changes on that? Malcolm, my questions to Malcolm are, you talked about Highland businesses and some businesses falling through the gaps. Have we kept a list of those businesses? Are we going to revisit them if there's more information comes from the Scottish Government that perhaps we could look at providing funding for them as we go forward? And you talked about the use of outdoor spaces for businesses. The press release came out yesterday and I read it and I went onto the link on the council's website. But how do businesses take forward their inquiries? Because I've already had a couple of businesses contact me about using outdoor space, because the press release was fine, but when you go onto the council website, it wasn't clear to me, or where you actually go for that contact. You talked about the business, the Benny Higgins report, and about the economic partnership that you've set up with HIE. And I wondered, when you mentioned you wanted a bottom-up conversation, what are we doing about the community development groups that are out there in our communities? It's been 10 years, I read recently, since the Christie report, when we talked about talking and supporting our communities. And it's only since lockdown that we've really got going, I have to say, as a council. And another book that we got recently, Chair, that we all got was from Commonweal, and it was Our Common Home. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there about especially dealing with digital inclusion, low carbon economy, and I'll stop there. I've got loads of questions, but I know I go on too much. And thanks, Fiona, as well.
Thank you very much, Angela. Craig.
Right, this one's primarily directed at Malcolm, and it could be one for Friday, but as connectivity was mentioned here, as members, we've got 4 members here from MPAC, and we regularly ask, myself included, what developers are actually doing to facilitate broadband connectivity and electric charge point connectivity. And we frequently get non-answers from developers. They basically say, oh, it might hit our profit. They probably say it's going to reduce their profits, or the technology might change. But we need, what this has shown us is that the need for our rural areas, doesn't matter whether it's Highland or elsewhere, the connectivity opens opportunities that these small businesses wouldn't necessarily have. And if that can be brought into Friday, and just a brief comment back on that, because I get quite frustrated at planning committees where we're asking genuine questions of developers and we don't get satisfactory answers. So that's my brief question.
Thank you. John, I think you've got a question as well. Would you like to?
Thanks, Gordon. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to intervene, really. It was more of a statement which I can leave to do with resilience and recovery. But I can say it now if you wish.
Well, just briefly, John. I think in the spirit of community inclusion, it'd be quite appropriate for you to do that.
Well, it was just to let people know. I mean, my involvement with Black Isle Partnership was primarily as chair of Black Isle Tourism Group, and going back to the previous comment from Craig about resilience, and ironically, we touched on it with Rona and the HIE funding, that one of the Black Isle Partnership's initial requests for funding, which was rejected because it wasn't deemed emergency, was about supporting local businesses, far too many of whom have put a reliance on tourism as a major income earner. And as we move into the next phase, let's not call it a recovery phase, I think it's just another phase. I think that's still something that really needs to be considered, and businesses need to be supported in diversifying and not putting all their eggs in the tourism basket, as has been clearly demonstrated over the last few months. That is not a reliable source of income.
Okay.
Can I just chip in there? Sorry, just a wee sec, just to clarify. It wasn't that it wasn't deemed as emergency, John. It was that it wasn't part of a sporting communities fund.
Yeah.
It was deemed that it was far more relevant to the other funds that were coming out.
Yeah. I'm not, Rona, I'm not having a go at you. Using it as an example. Maybe we were being a bit too strategic, and I appreciate there are other funds for that. The point I'm making is about community resilience and supporting businesses to diversify as a result of their experience in this, that tourism is not the goose that lays the golden egg necessarily.
That's John. Thanks. That's a point well made. Malcolm, can we go to you? You could pick up that point, and also pavements in Dingwall, businesses falling through the cracks, community development groups, and connectivity.
Okay, so thanks for that, and you know, I think Councillor Patterson, we're getting on with it as quick as we can. We've got I've got the plan in front of me actually that I'm looking at. I can't share the screen, but we are doing a lot of strumming on the paths along the periphery and in from Maryborough, and on the business park approach to the town, so in Dingwall itself. So that is all part of the costed and funded plan, as well as the reallocating some of the road space to widen the pavements. We've been, it wouldn't surprise you to know that just when you thought that there could never be a world shortage of traffic cones, unfortunately, everyone in the world is now looking for traffic cones. So we've got our first big delivery that was for the first phase, but we're now pushing on as quickly as we can to get that second phase in. And hopefully you'll see changes in the next couple of weeks. It's just about mobilising people and getting everyone doing it in the programme. But so that's on track. And if there are other areas you do feel need, we have put a bit of a general element within the funding application, which can be used for reactive work. So if people have ideas, then please get in touch with either me or with Colin Howell, who's leading the implementation of it. And he can see if there's a way of us redirecting some of the cash we've already got. We are also preparing a phase 3 bid, but in order to be successful in that phase 3 bid, we've got to spend 75% of what we've already got. So we need to get cracking on spending. I think in terms of street spaces and using street spaces, there is an email address, which is street.spaces@highland.gov.uk that people can use. And I'll pick up the point about it not being prominent on the website, and we'll try and improve that. And that what that means is that when somebody writes in there, it's picked up by licensing, it's picked up by roads, it's picked up by environmental health, etc. So people aren't being passed from pillar to post, hopefully, and that was what we're desperately trying to avoid. The bottom-up conversation and community-led, I think you're absolutely right that it needs to be a much more central part of what we're talking about. So at the strategic level, we wanted to make sure as part of the economic partnership that third sector were involved, and there was that kind of route back at the strategic level. And I know Alison and Karen McDermott, in terms of the place-based approach we're trying to put in place, that's very much part of it, and it is a strand of the recovery work we're doing. So hopefully we will see a much more activity around that. And Councillor Fraser, I totally agree with you in terms of perhaps the old model. It was difficult, and it has been difficult to insist on provision, for example, digital provision, or charging points, etc., because the regulation and the legislation isn't there, which makes it a requirement. But I do think we've got a really good opportunity, and we had a good meeting actually with Dundee City Council last week. We were talking about their green recovery strategy, which has actually been going on quite a long time in terms of their approach to electric vehicles and fleet, etc. And they actually make it a requirement within planning permissions to have that provision. So we're looking very carefully at that. And thanks for bringing it up, because it is really important. The digital work, we do have the schemes that are funded by the UK government in terms of the Rural Gigabit Connectivity Fund that's trying to get to hard to reach locations. We've got the local full fibre network that's also, again, trying to catch up. And then we've got the Scottish Government funded R100 scheme that we need to get implemented. It's currently got a few problems with the implementation. And then we've also got, on top of that, we've got City Region Deal strand that was going to be brought forward in tandem with the R100 scheme. So that's one of the areas where there's really, it's key that we work closely with HIE and indeed NHS on that project, because that will help to unlock the commercial rollout that will come in behind the publicly funded bit. But certainly in terms of planning requirements, I'm absolutely on it, and I do want to try and make it a very strong statement of our recovery strategy. And hopefully that deals with the questions.
Thank you, Malcolm. Question on diversification of business. I don't know if you want to pick that up, or Rona does, the importance of diversifying away from tourism.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point, and I think, trying to find a way is going to be around support, and obviously without having significant grants or significant funding streams, I think it's about working really closely with the Business Gateway team that we've got, but trying to make these links with HIE in terms of advice, Skills Development Scotland, and other agencies, and trying to make sure we do at least have an accessible training and advice service that can help to advise businesses who need that diversification. But you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge for us. We hope tourism will come back. It may not be this year, but certainly, because we've lost so much of the season already. But certainly we've got to keep looking at what makes the Highlands a special place, and obviously our natural environment is a huge part of it. So.
I don't know if you want to pick that up, Rona, whether or not that's a priority, realization that perhaps we're over dependent on tourism, and that some thought has to be given to some tourism businesses getting into different fields.
Well, I think certainly that's an area that, I spend quite a bit of my time each week on calls with tourism organisations and businesses, and I'm hearing firsthand some of the challenges that they face, the measures they've put in place, but that isn't going to be enough this year. Many are seeing things moved forward to next year, so they've essentially lost, the majority of their income for a whole year. But I'm also hearing numbers of surveys that have been conducted where things maybe are a bit more bright than we had initially envisaged, where maybe some of the bed and breakfasts and the hotels aren't seeing the business clientele that they would have expected, but lots of self-catering businesses are seeing much better results than they had envisaged, and maybe more so than they would have ordinarily. And that bed and breakfasts are starting to see bookings beginning to be made, certainly for later in the year. But from an organisational perspective, we work quite closely with a number of tourism businesses, and we absolutely know that they need our support. But we also know that we need to be developing some form of support programme that helps the sector innovate, helps it improve its productivity, and maybe adapting to different market circumstances. And you know, there's lots of organisations we currently work alongside who we can make much more use of, that, you know, organisations that maybe ordinarily we wouldn't have seen doing so much in that sector, but across all business sectors to help find a way forward. And most businesses who are operating want to continue, they want to seek support that helps them do things differently, be a bit more open-minded. But it's going to be difficult. It's absolutely going to be difficult, not just for that sector, across lots of different sectors. And I think, you know, alongside what Malcolm's just said, we need to be working collaboratively. We need to be finding a path through this together to provide the best support with the resources we have. And certainly, you know, we've got lots of businesses, key businesses in the patch that you are involved in, who employ a lot of people, and our intention is to support them as best we can to get them back into full operation, and looking to make a number of capital investments should additional monies become available, but that's always going to be the challenge.
Sure. Well, we look forward to some sort of future interesting thinking on innovative thinking on how perhaps people who are dependent on tourism now might become involved in other areas. Peter, can we just turn to you finally? Angela made 3 points. One was about carers and ambulances, another was on prescriptions, and a third on social care.
Yeah, certainly, and I picked up my pen as soon as I saw Councillor McLean's hand going up, so I've got a note of them here. The hospital appointments, these are matters for the ambulance service, and I will inquire of them, and I'll feed the answer back to yourself, Chair, in relation to that, in relation to whether carers can now travel in the ambulance or the patient transport service. In relation to social prescriptions, there's no doubt that from the very outset, the importance of outdoor exercise has been emphasised by the Scottish Government and encouraged at every stage. And that has been further encouraged with the lifting of the 5 mile restriction to be able to travel for that. So I would envisage that where possible, that will absolutely continue. The benefits cannot be underestimated. What does pertain, and this is true for tourists and everybody else coming in, the absolute importance of continued good hand hygiene, the social distancing, the wearing of masks when appropriate. And it'll be interesting to see how the mandatory wearing of masks in shops will be met here in the Highlands. My gut feeling is that most folk will go by the guidance, at least we hope so. The jury was out for some time in terms of the benefits of mask or face coverings, but I think the smart money is that they are more of benefit than any potential harm. In relation to the social care and the requirement for additional support, I think this whole epidemic response has shone a very bright light on the whole social care issue. I think it is the one big area where we need to have a close, hard look at that, be it care at home or in care homes. And I think it will be the subject of hopefully one of the lessons certainly identified. Hopefully we'll learn some lessons from this, and any additional support. We've heard of the excellent volunteering effort that's been identified in our response here, and hopefully that can be galvanised into something more formal in terms of enhancing the care that we provide in the social care field.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Angela, do you have one more question?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for letting me back in. I've got lots more, but I will just stick to this one. Rona mentioned about the number of businesses we have in our area, and in the report, Benny Higgins' report, it says 79% of jobs in Scotland exist in the private sector. So the more we do to support them, the better. My question. Also in that report, it talks about, Malcolm mentioned more people working from home because we have that ability, but it also says 90% of the top 50% of the earners can work from home, but 90% of the bottom 50% cannot do so because they're in the service industry or in low paid jobs, and many of our young people between the age of 16 and 24 are in that bottom 50%. And I wondered, Malcolm, are we looking at working, you mentioned Skills Development Scotland, but also with UHI to look at as we come out of this, well, we're going into a recession, but going to come out, move forward towards recovery. Are we looking at working with UHI and that to look at what skills do our young people need as we move forward? And also, Chair, I did mention earlier about community learning and development, and we did have an inspection in Highland last year, and we didn't come out of it that well as a council, but the third sector did, and Shona was part of that, as well as High Life Highland and the Voluntary Youth Work Network, and they do or can do a lot more in Youth Achievement Awards up to level 8, which means that for those that are not wanting to stay on at school, they have that opportunity to have that qualification, which will help them as they move forward into jobs. And that's me finished.
Right, thank you, Angela. There are a couple of other questions. Alistair McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair. And Peter, you obviously know Angela well with the questions. I would just like to reiterate what has been said here. That we as a council, as Malcolm has said, we have to work with all our agencies, HIE, NHS, UHI, and all the sectors out there as we go forward. We have to have this collaborative approach. There are huge challenges out there in front of us, but when there are challenges, there are also opportunities for us collaboratively to do things differently. And I believe that we have and we will learn a lot from what has happened as a council and various other sectors as well to go forward. I'd just like to repeat what has been said. That thank you everybody for your presentations, and it certainly has been interesting and certainly gives us encouragement to move forward on a united front. Thank you.
Thanks for that summary, Alistair. It's appreciated. Craig, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you for letting me back in. This one's directed at Peter. You probably won't need a pen and a ream of paper. I'm just in the process of dropping an email to Malcolm on what I'd spoken to before. But when I had you may or may not know, I had a stroke back in 2009 and I was involved with remote health, which has been, I believe, led through Rehome. And one of the things that they were talking then, I know it's cropped up before, is that there's two elements to remote health. One is from having remote health at the home, so you'll need really useful broadband there, and the other one is remote health for the emergency services. So when they turn up at incidences, say it's a stroke or a heart attack, particularly let's go on stroke, you have two types, either a clot or a bleed, and to have the facility on an ambulance to scan somebody, such as using ultrasound. So you need the two elements there, and it's become even more since this crisis happened, important that we have that broadband connectivity. So I'll be mentioning that in my email to Malcolm, so he can bring that forward to the national framework on Friday. So it's just to mention the remote health there and how important it is that our broadband connectivity in Highland and rural areas is up to speed.
Thanks, Craig. Do you want to say anything about that, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. I share Alistair's optimism for some of the benefits that might accrue out of our learning experience over the past few months. And certainly what you refer to, Craig, the ability of a consultant in the emergency department in Rigmore to have a reading of what's happening to the patient in the back of the ambulance can only enhance their care once they arrive, instead of having to start from scratch in terms of the examination. They already know most of the story. So I was speaking with our Deputy Head of Health before I joined this meeting, and he mentioned the fact that there are a number of things that were in the pipeline, but for whatever reason weren't making as much progress as he would have liked, that perhaps the blockages can be unblocked now, and that all these projects can be brought forward. We'll obviously have to prioritise because there's not an endless pit of money, but I think there is a real opportunity now to move forward to a different way of working.
Thank you. Malcolm, would you like to answer Angela's point about UHI collaboration?
Yes, is the answer. And they are very much part of the economic partnership we're putting together. You know, a lot of the, obviously we'll wait for guidance from the national side, but some of the ideas coming forward about job guarantees, about keeping the pipeline of modern apprenticeships, that graduate apprentices, it needs that collaboration. So absolutely, UHI are part of that, and I hope we can build further. So they are very much part of our economic partnership.
That's good to know. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Chair, I'm very, very sorry, but I have another meeting that I must attend. Is it okay if I?
No, I really appreciate you being here all this time, Malcolm. It's been a long meeting, and in fact, I'm going to bring it to an end now, if that's agreeable to all members. We've been at it for almost 3 hours. Yeah, much appreciated. I think the discussion has been really quite interesting, and I do appreciate all your time, all our guests and officers, the members. On behalf of the members, I'd like to thank you very much for your contributions. And I think it's time for a cup of tea, I think. So let's call proceedings to an end. Thank you all very much. And no doubt we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye-bye. All the best.
Thank you, Chair.